Yeah, yes. Lynn, it is an old school method. Okay. So let me just first of all say, the whole purpose of transparency and everything is important. So here, for example, is the exact methodology we use. Here's the steps that we typically do in each methodology. Here's the number of interviews or survey, whatever, that we're expected to. This is all about transparency. But the question of how many hours do we have actually, attached to each one of these things? Most people who've got some deeper experience selling services know that some might be higher, some might be lower because it is an estimate. But hopefully, in terms of the entire engagement, it kind of balances out to where it is now. Let's just say, for example, in there, you're very clear about the scope. You're going to be doing 10 interviews, and all of a sudden, the client says, "Well, you know what? We've got this other division. We want you to do 20 interviews." Okay, in which case, thank you very much. Change request, and you should pay for it. Okay, or change request. Note that it's different, but any little bit of extra little, space we had, okay, is not. It won't be available anymore, right? So being transparent is critically important. I think being accountable is important for some people in services where you're just selling hours. Okay, that's all you're doing. You're selling hours. Okay, my suggestion is, are you really selling hours? Are you selling the solution to a problem? Okay. And if you're selling the solution to the problem, what do hours have to do with it? Sometimes you have to put a lot more if you're selling that solution. Okay. Sometimes you get a chance to do a little bit less, but as you get experience, you probably have a good sense of approximately how much time it's going to take, right? So if you're not selling hours, what are you doing? You're selling compared to the value of what you're able to do, right? The impact of what you're able to do, I should say. So what I would say there is that if you're selling hours and it's a $6,000 engagement and it's that $100,000 problem, is $6,000 really the right number for you to be putting in that proposal? Well, once again, cost of service is one thing, competitive offering is another, budget's that third criteria, right? And I'd probably suggest that you might be able to charge a little bit more. And by the way, think about what that does. If it turns out that you go above your $6,000 of internally budgeted time, it means you don't feel like you're being taken advantage of because you've got a couple $1,000s more of headspace that you could do something with, right? And I think that what that does in terms of your attitude on the job is absolutely critically, because the client will feel that as you're doing the work. Okay. I think one of the biggest challenges for people who are selling hours is when you get to near the end of the hours, all of a sudden the work effort slows down to a dribble and the client gets ticked off. And you might have done amazing work for 95% of it, but all of a sudden, most experienced, advisors will nip it in the bud far, far earlier, but that doesn't mean that others on the job won't sort of say, "Hey, listen, are we working for free here? What's the story?" Right? The other thing I would say is when it comes to your actual pricing, thinking about the cost of service aspect of it, you could say it's going to cost so many hours of time to actually deliver this. Excuse me. And then you can start to say, well, this particular client, getting into Andrew's point, this particular client, I know there's going to be a higher risk of delivery because there's going to be a lot more back and forth with this client compared to quote our standard client. So if you want at the very end, you could say, okay, so it's a $6,000 thing. Normally I'll put a 15% kind of like fudge factor in. So maybe it's now 7,000, etc. But gee, this one client, it's a new client, it's a new industry. My indications are they're going to be very needy. Maybe I've got to put a 35 or 40% sort of fudge factor in. So that 7,000 now becomes 9 or 10,000. So I think that you can start to do that. And likewise, for the clients that you've done a lot of work with before, where the risk level is far lower, why would adding 15%, why would you do that? Okay, there isn't that risk. Okay. And it speaks to being, or there's far less risk anyway. And so why don't you, be a little bit more competitive, right? And give them a better rate, right? Once again, I don't think it's always about rates. I think it's about doing that discovery and making sure that you truly understand what the problem is that you're being hired to solve and what the impact of the problem is. If it's important to everybody at the client, hopefully they will have done their homework and they'll understand what the value is. Otherwise, why bother going to solve it? And by the way, sometimes when government-oriented organizations say, well, we've got so much money in our budget, we got to use it up by October 31st or December 31st, that's a different sort of angle here. We're not talking about that in this particular case, but in traditional procurement, that's where it is. But I will say I'm not being judgmental on people's business model as one where they're selling hours. And for
That's
those particular clients, I know that might not be the case with you, but for
yeah.
any of our listeners, okay, if that's your business model and if that's the expectation, for example, this is something that I'm not saying you should stop doing. If this is the client expectation, this is the way you work. Okay, I just think that you know, thinking a bit beyond that might also be helpful. So